A balloon drifts silently across the sky above Belgorod. No engine, no heat signature, no radio emissions. By the time a Russian radar operator catches it on his screen, the object is already 42 kilometers inside Russian airspace, climbing toward 8 kilometers of altitude. He has seconds to make a decision worth $1 million. He fires. And that, precisely, is what Ukraine wanted him to do. What looks like a clumsy balloon attack is actually something far more sophisticated, a weapon system that has weaponized the atmosphere itself. A system Russia cannot copy, cannot intercept economically, and cannot escape. Because the wind blows in only one direction across this part of the world. And physics, in this war, has chosen a side. The story you're about to hear isn't really about balloons. It's about how a country at a massive disadvantage in conventional military spending discovered that nature itself could be drafted into the war effort, for free, and what that means for every air defense doctrine written in the last 50 years. In May 2026, Ukrainian forces conducted a test that defense analysts are still struggling to categorize. They attached a Hornet kamikaze drone to a helium aerostat, released it into the prevailing westerly winds, and watched it travel 42 kilometers eastward without burning a single watt of battery power. The balloon lifted the drone to 8 kilometers of altitude before releasing it. That sentence sounds technical. The implication is not. The Hornet, a fixed-wing loitering munition built by the American firm Performance Drone Works, has a standard operational range of approximately 150 kilometers. With the balloon carrying it deep into enemy territory before release, and with its battery preserved by the free ride, that range effectively doubles. 300 kilometers. Striking distance from the Ukrainian border now reaches industrial Russia. But the range number is the surface story. The deeper story is what this means for the concept of a rear area. For 80 years, military doctrine has been built around the idea that distance equals safety. Move your refineries, your command nodes, your logistics hubs far enough behind the front, and you place them out of reach. Ukraine has just announced that there is no behind anymore. To understand why this matters, you have to understand the Hornet itself. 2-meter wingspan, 5-kilogram warhead, cruising speed around 100 kilometers per hour. None of those numbers are particularly impressive. What is impressive is what happens when Russian electronic warfare operators try to stop it. When jamming severs the control link, the drone does not crash. It does not loiter aimlessly. Its onboard AI activates terrain contour navigation, comparing what its sensors see to preloaded maps of the landscape below, and finishes the mission autonomously. Russian EW operators, in their own internal assessments, have described this behavior as extremely dangerous, because the moment they succeed in jamming the signal is the moment they lose the ability to influence the outcome. Now stack the balloon on top of that drone, a weapon that cannot be jammed into submission, launched from a platform that cannot be tracked easily, riding a current of air that cannot be reversed. Each layer was already difficult. Combined, they create a problem with no clean military solution. And this is where the story stops being about a weapon and starts being about geography. Between the 45th and 52nd parallels of the Northern Hemisphere, exactly where Ukraine sits, the atmosphere follows a rule it has followed for as long as the planet has had an atmosphere. The prevailing winds blow from west to east. Always. Permanently. There is no season in which this reverses. No weather pattern that overrides it. No engineering project that can redirect it. From Ukraine, those winds blow into Russia. From Russia, those same winds blow further east, toward Siberia, toward Kazakhstan, away from any target Moscow would want to strike. If Russia wanted to mirror this weapon and launch balloons toward Kyiv, it would have to renegotiate the fundamental dynamics of planetary atmospheric circulation. That is not a budget line item. That is not a 5-year procurement plan. That is simply not available. Retired Colonel Viktor Kevliuk of the Center for Defense Strategies summarized it with the kind of dry precision that only military analysts manage. The Russians also possess aerostats, but in this domain, the atmosphere is not on their side. A weapon that geography itself refuses to give to your enemy is a rare thing. The last time something comparable existed in modern warfare may have been the British naval position in the Age of Sail. And just as wind once decided who ruled the oceans, it is now deciding who can reach the Russian rear. This system did not appear overnight. It evolved in stages, each one more lethal than the last, and at every stage, Russia's air defense calculus got worse. The first phase, in 2024, was deception. Simple latex balloons drifted across the border, carrying nothing of consequence. Their job was to appear on radar screens, generate false targets, and waste Russian attention. Cheap, crude, effective. The second phase, through 2025, was diversification. By late autumn of that year, Ukrainian forces had released more than 1,000 helium balloons into Russian airspace, and the payloads had multiplied. Signal repeaters, reconnaissance sensors, small explosive charges, miniature attack drones. During the September 2025 strikes against Moscow and Tatarstan, balloons were used in coordination with conventional drone waves to saturate and confuse air defenses. Russian sources later admitted the balloons had deceived their radars. The third phase, beginning late 2025, was direct payload delivery. The balloon stopped being a decoy and became the weapon itself, carrying explosive charges into Russian airspace. The fourth phase is the one we are watching unfold right now. The balloon becomes a launch platform for autonomous strike drones. Each evolutionary step made the system cheaper to produce and more expensive to defeat. Between February and March 2026, medium-range Ukrainian drone strikes more than doubled, reaching at least 288 documented raids, according to analysts at the open-source group Tokni. Balloon-supported operations were the primary accelerator behind that surge, and the trajectory has not flattened. It is still climbing. Now we arrive at the part of this story that Moscow cannot solve no matter how many missiles it builds. A complete balloon plus Hornet system costs approximately $6,000. The balloon itself is built from latex, nylon, or polyethylene, basic industrial materials Ukraine sources domestically with no Chinese dependency. Helium is the only consumable, and industrial-grade purity is sufficient. A tethered aerostat, the kind that hovers in place to relay signals, costs roughly $15 per day to operate. Now look at what Russia spends to engage them. A single Pantsir S-1 missile costs between $60,000 and $100,000. An S-300 missile can reach $500,000. The S-400's 48N6 interceptor exceeds $1 million per shot. And because balloons routinely rise above 10 kilometers, beyond the engagement ceiling of short-range systems like Pantsir and Tor, Russia is forced to fire its strategic tier interceptors, the ones reserved for cruise missiles and ballistic threats, at targets that cost less than a used car. The ratio is not 10 to 1. It is not 100 to 1. In some engagements, it is more than 1,000 to 1. But the unit cost asymmetry is only the surface layer. Beneath it lies something more corrosive. Some of these balloons are designed to be detected, deliberately, visibly. The strategic logic sounds counterintuitive until you sit in the chair of the Russian commander on the receiving end. When a balloon appears on radar, that commander has two options, and both of them cost him. If he fires, he expends a missile worth potentially $1 million on an object worth a few hundred. And that missile is no longer available when the real drone swarm arrives along a different vector 20 minutes later. If he does not fire, the balloon might be carrying an actual weapon, and a few hours later, a refinery is burning in Ryazan or Saratov. Every decision he makes is the wrong one. This is not a tactical problem. This is a structural trap. Moscow has already lived through the consequences. Balloons approaching the capital have triggered temporary airport closures, suspended civilian flights, and paralyzed air traffic control. According to one source close to operations, the Russian reaction near sensitive zones is immediate and reflexive. They fire without hesitation. Every time they fire, the Ukrainian objective is satisfied. An expensive interceptor is spent. A radar position is exposed and geolocated. Air defense capacity erodes by another increment. This cumulative effect has a name in the analytical literature: air defense fatigue. Radars kept continuously active, operators exhausted by perpetual alert, equipment wearing out far faster than maintenance schedules anticipated, missile inventories drained against decoys. And then, when the real strike package arrives, dozens or hundreds of coordinated kamikaze drones, the defensive system meeting them is already depleted, slow to respond, and short on ammunition. Ukraine's cheap balloons are rotting Russia's expensive defenses from the inside out. This is not the first time a major power has been hit by wind-borne weapons. In 1944, Imperial Japan released more than 9,000 Fugo balloon bombs into the Pacific jet stream, aiming for the American mainland. They crossed 8,000 kilometers of ocean without engines, fuel, or pilots, riding a current of air that Japanese meteorologists had mapped years earlier. The United States hid the existence of this campaign from its own public. Censorship was imposed because the panic was judged more dangerous than the bombs. Japan, never seeing the impact, eventually abandoned the program, believing it had failed. 80 years later, the same physical principle is being applied, but with a generation of technology layered on top that the engineers in 1944 could not have imagined. AI-powered terminal guidance, real-time meteorological modeling, autonomous target classification, terrain contour navigation. Japan had only balloons and explosives, no targeting and no control, and most of their weapons fell harmlessly into the ocean. Ukraine has the same wind, with brains attached. And critically, Russia in 2026 does not have the option that the United States used in 1944. There is no censoring this. The strikes are too public, the social media documentation too pervasive, the geopolitical stakes too high. The weapon must be defeated openly, and openly, it cannot be defeated economically. Honesty requires acknowledging what this system cannot do. Once a free-flying balloon is released, it cannot be steered. AI-driven meteorological models can predict wind trajectories with operational accuracy, but the atmosphere is a chaotic system, and significant margins of error remain on every mission. When winds shift unexpectedly, balloons drift off target. In poor weather, launch windows narrow or close entirely. This weapon is not used when Ukraine chooses. It is used when nature permits. At altitude, GPS reliability decreases, and Russian electronic warfare units have begun concentrating spoofing and jamming efforts precisely on these envelopes. The Hornet's terrain contour guidance offers a partial answer, but claiming 100% reliability across all conditions would be premature. And the May 2026 Hornet aerostat combination is still, technically, in the testing phase. The successful trial has not yet been confirmed in an operational strike. The 300-kilometer range figure has not been independently verified. The potential is enormous. The proof is still partial. But here is the strategic point that critics of the system keep missing. This weapon's power does not derive from precision. It derives from cost asymmetry. Even if only 10 balloons out of 100 reach their targets, Ukraine has spent a few $1,000s while Russia has expended interceptors worth tens of millions. The math does not require perfection. It only requires consistency. And every test cycle, every software update, every new launch crew makes the system marginally more reliable. The technology is not static. It is iterating in wartime conditions, which is the fastest evolutionary environment any weapon system can experience. Free-flying balloons are only half of Ukraine's aerostat doctrine. The other half hovers in place. Tethered aerostats manufactured by the company Aerobavovna are positioned at 500 to 1,000 meters above Ukrainian territory, drawing electrical power up through their tether cables and staying airborne for up to 3 days at a time. They serve as communications relays that allow FPV drones and medium-range strike drones to be controlled from hundreds of kilometers away. They carry cameras and sensors that detect incoming Shahed drones and other aerial threats. Chained together, their signal repeaters can extend continuous control links well beyond 100 kilometers, enabling long-range weapons to remain under operator command deep into hostile airspace. Only 2 of these tethered platforms have been confirmed destroyed to date. Their survival rate is remarkably high, partly because they are difficult to engage economically, and partly because their relatively low altitude places them in a defensive zone Ukraine can protect. Free-flying balloons carry the weapons. Tethered aerostats carry the signals. Together, they form an aerial nervous system that costs almost nothing to operate and gives Ukraine command and control reach that, 10 years ago, only nations with satellite constellations possessed. For most of the last 50 years, military doctrine in the West and in Russia rested on a shared assumption that air superiority is purchased through expensive platforms. Stealth fighters, long-range missiles, sophisticated radars, integrated air defense networks. The cost of entry was prohibitive, which is what made these capabilities a national power signature. That assumption has just broken. Ukraine is achieving strategic effects, paralysis of capital cities, destruction of refineries, exhaustion of S-400 batteries, using systems that cost less than a used pickup truck. The traditional defense industry builds platforms worth billions. Ukraine is generating equivalent operational pressure with systems worth thousands. And the wind, as one analyst put it, is paying the bill. This is not just a Ukrainian innovation, it is a preview. Every nation watching this war is recalculating. If a billion-dollar air defense network can be drained and humiliated by helium balloons carrying autonomous gliders, then the entire economic logic of national air defense needs to be rewritten. Taiwan is watching. South Korea is watching. NATO planners are watching. Iran and its proxies are watching with particular attention. And the lesson everyone is taking away is the same. The next decade of warfare will not be won by whoever spends the most. It will be won by whoever generates the most asymmetric pressure per dollar. The trajectory points and directions Moscow will not enjoy contemplating. Balloons do not have to carry only drones. They can carry unmanned ground vehicles designed to be released, land softly, and operate autonomously inside enemy territory. They can carry unmanned surface vessels, dropped near rivers and inland waterways. One source close to operations offered a provocative scenario. Imagine a Ukrainian unmanned ground vehicle in Red Square, delivered by an object Russian air defense classified as low priority and ignored. This is speculative. It is also not implausible. The broader trend is clearer. Ukraine is constructing a multi-domain unmanned ecosystem: air, ground, sea, riverine, and the connective tissue between these domains is increasingly aerostatic. Balloons as transport, balloons as relays, balloons as launchers, all sharing the same characteristics: cheap, autonomous, scalable, and powered partly by an atmosphere that refuses to cooperate with Moscow. Colonel Kevliuk's final assessment is simple. The trend is clear. Balloons have become part of the arsenal for medium and long-range strikes, and they are not going away. So we return to where we began. A balloon drifts silently across the sky above Belgorod. To the radar operator watching it, it looks like a primitive threat, a relic almost of a war from another century. It is nothing of the kind. It is the visible edge of a transformation in how wars will be fought, who can fight them, and what advantages money can no longer buy. It is the moment when a country with a fraction of its enemy's defense budget discovered that the atmosphere itself could be enlisted, that physics had preferences, and that the wind, the oldest force on the battlefield, had quietly become the newest one. Ukraine was dragged into a full-scale war carrying enormous disadvantages. It has spent 3 years finding ways to convert those disadvantages into asymmetries, and asymmetries into leverage. The prevailing wind does not change. It will blow from west to east tomorrow, next year, and a century from now. Physics has picked a side, and it is not switching. The real question is no longer whether balloons can damage Russia. They already do. The question is what other nations are now studying this playbook, and which billion-dollar air defense network is next to discover that it was built to stop the wrong kind of war. If the side with less money can keep generating more pressure, has the balance of military power already shifted while the rest of the world was still measuring it by the old metrics?